Hey everyone, welcome to the Latent Space podcast. This is Alessio, partner and CTO at Decibel Partners, and I'm joined by my co-host Swix, founder of Small AI.
Hey, and today we're still in our sort of makeshift in-between studio, but we're very delighted to have a former returning guest host, Itamar. Welcome back.
Great to be here after a year or more.
Yeah, a year and a half. You're one of our earliest guests on Agents. Now you're CEO co-founder of Qodo.
Right.
Which has just been renamed. You also raised a $30 million Series A.
Series A was 40, yeah.
$40 million Series A. And we can get caught up on everything. But we're also delighted to have our new guest, Eric. Welcome.
Yeah, excited to be here.
Should I say Bolt or Stackblitz? Like, is it like its own company now? Or?
Yeah, I mean, Bolt's definitely Bolt.new. That's the thing that we're probably the most known for, I imagine, at this point.
Which is ridiculous to say because you were working at Stackblitz for so long.
Yeah, I mean, it was within a week. We were doing double the amount of traffic. And Stackblitz had been online for 7 years, and we were like, what? But anyways, yeah. So we're Stackblitz, the company behind Bolt.new. So if you've heard of Bolt.new, that's our stuff. So
yeah, excellent.
I think, by the way, that the founder mode, you need to know to capture opportunities. So like kudos on doing that, right? Like you're working on some technology and then suddenly you can exploit that to new world. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think, not to jump, but 100%. Kind of a couple of months ago, we had the idea for Bolt earlier this year. But we haven't really shared this too much publicly, but we actually had tried to build it with some of the, state-of-the-art models back in January, February, you can kind of imagine which, and they just weren't good enough to actually do the code generation where the code was accurate and, as fast and whatever have you without a ton of RAG, but then there's issues with that. So we put it on the shelf and then we got kind of a sneak peek of, some of the new models that have come out, in the past couple of months now. And so once we actually saw the code gen from it, we were like, oh my God, okay, we can build a product around this. And so that was really the impetus of us building the thing. But with that, it was, Stackblitz, the core Stackblitz product the past 7 years has been an IDE for developers. So the entire user experience flow we've built up just didn't make sense. And so when we kind of went out to build Bolt, we just thought, if we were inventing our product today, what would the interface look like given what is now possible with AI code gen? And so there's definitely a lot of conversations we had internally, but just kind of when we logically laid it out, we were like, yeah, I think it makes sense to just greenfield a new thing and let's see what happens. If it works great, then we'll figure it out. If it doesn't work great, then it'll get deleted at some point, right? But yeah. Anyway, so that's kind of how it actually came to be.
I'll mention your background a little bit. You were also founder of Thinkster before
you
started Stackblitz. So both of you are second-time founders. Both of you have sort of refounded your company recently. Well, yours was more of a rename. I think a slightly different direction as well. And then we can talk about both. Maybe just chronologically, should we get caught up on where Qodo is first, and then just what people should know since the last pod?
Sure. The last pod was 2 months after we launched, and we basically had the vision that we talked about, the idea that software development is about specification, test, and code, etc.
Yep.
And we are more on the testing part. As in essence, we think that if you solve testing, you solve software development.
The beautiful chart
exactly,
that we'll put up on screen.
Chart. And testing is a really big field. Where there are many dimensions. Unit testing, the level of the component, how big it is, how large it is, and then there is different type of testing. Is it regression or smoke or whatever? So back then we only had one ID extension with unit tests as and focus. So 1.5 years later, first ID extension supports more type of testing. As context aware, we index local repos, but also 10,000s of repos for Fortune 500 companies. We have another agent, another tool that is called, the peer agent is the open source, and the commercial one is Qodo Merge. And then we have another open source called the Cover Agent, which is not yet a commercial product, coming very soon. It's very impressive. It could be that already people are approving automated pull requests that they don't even aware in really big open sources. So once we have enough of these, we will also launch another agent. In 1.5 years, what we did is grew in our offering, and mostly on the side of, does this code actually works? Testing, code review, etc. And we believe that's the critical milestone that needs to be achieved to actually have the AI engineer for enterprise software. So, and then for the first year was everything bottom up, getting to 1 million installation. 2024, that was 2023. 2024 was starting to monetize, to feel like how it is to make the first buck. So we did the Teams offering. It went well with 1,000 of Teams, etc. And then we started like just a few months ago to do enterprise with everything you need, which is a lot of things that discussed in the last post that was just released by Qodo.
Yeah,
that's how we call at AlphaCodium. Just opening the brackets. Our company name was Qodium AI, and we renamed to Qodo, and we call our models Qodium. So back to my point, so we started the enterprise motion and already have like multiple like Fortune 100 companies. And then with that, we raised a Series A of $40 million. And what's exciting about it is that enables us to develop more agents. That's our focus. Like, I think it's very different. We're not coming very soon with an ID or something like that.
You don't want to fork VS Code?
Yeah, maybe we'll fork JetBrains or something just to be different.
I noticed that, I think the promise of general purpose agents has kind of died. Like, everyone is doing kind of what you're doing. There's Qodo Gen, Qodo Merge, and then there's a third one. What's the name of it?
Yeah, the Qodo Cover. Which is like a commercial version of a cover agent. It's coming soon.
Yeah. I see something similar with Factory AI, also doing like droids. They all have special purpose doing things, but people don't really want general purpose agents, right? The last time you were here, we talked about AutoGPT, the biggest thing of 2023. Yeah. This year, not really relevant anymore. And I think it's mostly just because I think when you give me a general purpose agent, I don't know what to do with it.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. We're saying it for a while, and I think it will stay like that, despite the computer use, etc., that supposedly can just replace us, and you can just like prompt it to be, hey, now be a QA, or be a QA person or a developer. I still think that there's a few reasons why you see like a dedicated agent. Again, I'm a bit more focused. Like my head is more on complex software for big teams and enterprise, etc. And even think about permissions and what are the data sources, and just the same way you manage permissions for users. Like developers, you probably want to have dedicated guardrails and dedicated approvals for agents. I intentionally touched a point that not many people think about. And of course, then what you can think of, like maybe there's different tool use, etc. But just the first point by itself is a good reason why you want to have different agents.
Just to compare that with Bolt.new, you're almost focused on like the application is very complex and now you need better tools to kind of manage it and build on top of it. On Bolt, it's almost like I was using it the other day. There's basically like, hey, look, I'm just trying to get started. I'm not very opinionated on like how you're going to implement this. Like, this is what I want to do. And you build a beautiful with it. What people ask as the next step, going back to like the general versus like specific, have you had people say, hey, this is great to start, but then I want a specific Bolt.new whatever else to do a more vertical integration and kind of like development, or what do people say?
Yeah, I think you kind of hit it head on, which is, kind of the way that we've kind of talked about it internally is it's like people are using Bolt to go from like 0.0 to 1.0. Like that's like kind of the biggest unlock that Bolt has versus most other things out there. I mean, I think that's kind of what's very unique about Bolt. I think the working on like existing enterprise applications is, it's crazy important because, there's, when you look at the Fortune 500, these code bases, some of these have been around for, 20, 30 plus years. And so it's important to be going from, 101.3 to 101.4, et cetera. I think for us, so what's been actually pretty interesting is we see there's kind of two different users for us that are coming in, and it's very distinct. It's like people that are developers already, and then there's people that have never really written software, and or if they have, it's been very, very minimal. And so in the first camp, what these developers are doing, like to go from 0 to 1, they're coming to Bolt, and then they're ejecting the thing to GitHub or just downloading and opening Cursor, like whatever, to keep iterating on the thing. And sometimes they'll bring it back to Bolt to like add in a huge piece of functionality or something, right? But for the people that don't know how to code, they're actually just they live in this thing. And that was one of the weird things when we launched is, within a day of us being online, one of the most popular YouTube videos, and there's been a ton since, which is, there's like, oh, Bolt is the cursor killer. And I originally saw the headlines and I was like, thanks for the views. I don't know. This doesn't make sense to me. That's not what we kind of thought.
This is how YouTubers talk to each other. Well, everything kills everything else.
Totally. But what blew my mind was that there was any comparison, because it's like Cursor is a local IDE product. But when we actually kind of dug into it and we have people that are using our product saying this, I'm not using Cursor. And we're like, what? And it turns out there are hundreds of thousands of people that we have seen that were using Cursor and we're trying to build apps with that where they're not traditional software devs, but we're heavily leaning on the AI. And as you can imagine, it is very complicated, right, to do that with Cursor. So when Bolt came out, they're like, wow, this thing's amazing because it kind of inverts the complexity where it's like, it's not an IDE, it's a chat-based sort of interface that we have. So that's kind of the split, which is rather interesting. We've had like the first startups now launch off of Bolt entirely, where this, tomorrow I'm doing a live stream with this guy named Paul, who he's built an entire CRM using this thing, and with backend, et cetera. And people have made their first money on the internet, period, launching this with Stripe or whatever have you. So, so that's kind of the two main categories of folks that we see using Bolt, though.
I agree that I don't understand the comparison. Doesn't make sense to me. I think like we have like two type of families of tools. One is like we reimagine the software development. I think Bolt is there. And I think like a Cursor is more like an evolution of what we already have. It's like taking the IDE, and it's amazing. And it's okay, let's adapt the IDE to an era where LLMs can do a lot for us. And Bolt is more like, okay, let's rethink everything totally. And I think we see a few tools there, like maybe Vercel, VO, and maybe Replit and that area. And then in the area of let's expedite, let's change, let's progress with what we already have. You can see Cursor and Qodo. We're different between ourselves, Cursor and Qodo, but definitely I think that comparison doesn't make sense.
And just to set the context, this is not a Twitter demo. You made $4 million of revenue in 4 weeks, so this is actually working. It's not a. Yeah. What do you think that is? Like, there's been so many people demoing coding agents on Twitter, and then it doesn't really work. And then you guys were just like, "Here you go, it's live. Go use it. Pay us for it." Yeah. Is there anything in the development that was like interesting, and maybe how that compares to building your own agents?
We had no idea, honestly. Like we've been pretty blown away, and things have just kind of continued to grow faster since then. We're like today is week 6. So I coming back to the point you just made, right? Where it's you kind of outlined. It's like there's kind of this new market of like kind of rethinking software development, and then there's heavily augmenting existing developers. I think that both of which are AI. Code gen being extremely good. It's allowed existing developers, it's allowing existing developers to hammer out software far faster than they could have ever before, right? It's like the ultimate power tool for an existing developer. But this code gen stuff is now so good. And we saw this over the past, from the beginning of the year when we tried to first build Bolt. It's actually lowered the barrier to people that aren't traditionally software engineers. But the key thing is, if you kind of think about it imagine you've never written software before, right? My co-founder and I grew up down the street from each other in Chicago. We learned how to code when we were 13 together, and we've been building stuff ever since. And this is back in like the mid 2000s or whatever. There was nothing for free to learn from online on the internet and how to code. So like for our 13th birthdays, we asked our parents for O'Reilly books because you couldn't get this at the library, right? And so instead of like an Xbox, we got programming books. But the hardest part for everyone learning to code is getting an environment set up locally. And so when we built Stackblitz, like kind of the key thesis, like 7 years ago, the insight we had was that it seems like the browser has a lot of new APIs like WebAssembly and service workers, et cetera, where you could actually write an operating system that ran inside the browser that could boot in milliseconds. And you basically there's this missing capability of the web. Like the web should be able to build apps for the web, right? You should be able to build the web on the web. Every other platform has that. Visual Studio for Windows, Xcode for Mac. The web has no built-in primitive for this. And so just like our built-in kind of like nerd instinct on this was like, that seems like a huge hole, and it's, will be very valuable, or like, very valuable problem to solve. So people have to set up dev environments. This is what we spent the past 7 years doing. And the reality is existing developers running locally, they already know how to set up dev environments, so the problem isn't as acute for them. When we put Bolt online, we took that technology called Web Container and married it with these state-of-the-art frontier models. And the people that have the most pain with getting stuff set up locally is people that don't code. I think that's been really the big explosive reason is no one else has been trying to make dev environments work inside of a browser tab, for the past, since ever, other than basically our company, largely because there wasn't an immediate demand or need. So I think we kind of find ourselves at the right place at the right time. And again, for this market of people that don't know how to write software, you would kind of expect that you should be able to do this without downloading something to your computer. In the same way that, hey, I don't have to download Photoshop now to make designs because there's Figma. I don't have to download Word because there's Google Docs. They're kind of looking at this as that sort of thing, right? Which was kind of the our impetus and kind of vision from the get-go. But the code gen, the AI code gen stuff that's come out has just been an order of magnitude multiplier on how magic that is, right? So that's kind of my best distillation of like what is going on here,
Yeah, and you can deploy too, right?
Yes.
Stackblitz, yeah.
Yeah, and so that's what's really cool is it's we have deployment built in with Netlify, and this is actually I think Sean, you actually built this at Netlify when you were there. One of the most brilliant integrations, actually, because effectively the API that Sean built, maybe you can speak to it, but like as a provider, we can just effectively give files to Netlify without the user even logging in, and they have a live website. And if they want to hold on to it, they can click a link and claim it to their Netlify account. But it basically is just this really magic experience because when you come to Bolt, you say, I want a website. Like my mom, 71 years old, made her first website on the internet 2 weeks ago, right? It was about her nursing days. and it made up some...
Oh, that's fantastic, though. It wouldn't have been made.
100%, because even in, when we had a lot of people building personal, like deeply personal stuff, like in the first week we launched this sales guy from the East Coast, replied to a tweet of mine and he said, thank you so much for building this, to your team. His daughter has a medical condition. And so for her to travel, she has to like line up donors or something, so ahead of time. And so he actually used Bolt to make a website to do that, to actually go and send it to folks in the region she was going to travel to ahead of time. I was really touched by it. And I also thought like, why didn't he use like Wix or Squarespace, right? I mean, this is a solved problem, quote unquote, right? And then when I actually used Squarespace for my the wedding website for my wife and I, like back in 2021. So I'm familiar, it was faster. I know how to code. I was like, this is faster, right? And I thought back and I was like, there's a whole interface you have to learn how to use. And it's actually not that simple. There's like a million things you can configure in that thing. When you come to Bolt, there's a text box. You just say, I need a wedding website. Here's the date. Here's where it is. and here's a photo of me and my wife. Put it somewhere relevant. It's actually the simplest way. And that's what when my mom came, she said, I'm Pat Simons. I was a nurse in the 70s, and like, here's the things I did. And a website came out. So coming back to why is this why are we seeing this sort of growth? This is the simplest interface I think maybe ever created to actually build and deploy a website. Because and then that website my mom made, she's like, okay, this looks great. And there's one button, you just click it, deploy, and it's live. And you can buy a domain name, attach it to it, and it's as simple as it gets. It's getting even simpler with some of the stuff we're working on. But anyways, so that's it's been really interesting to see some of the usage like that.
I can offer my perspective. So I probably should have disclosed a little bit that I'm a Stackblitz investor.
Cancel the episode.
I know.
Pause.
Eric actually reached out to show me Bolt before the launch, and we talked a lot about like the framing of what we're going to talk about, how we marketed the thing, but also like what Bolt was going to need, like a whole sort of infrastructure. Netlify, I was a maintainer of the CLI, but I won't take claim for the anonymous upload. That's actually the origin story of Netlify. We can have Matt Billman talk about it, but he that was how Netlify started. You could drag and drop a zip file or folder from your desktop onto a website. It would have a live URL with no sign-in. And so that was the origin story of Netlify, and it just persists till today. And it's just like, it's really nice, interesting that both Bolt and Cognition Devin and a bunch of other sort of agent type startups, they all use Netlify to deploy because of this one feature. They don't really care about the other features of Netlify. Yeah. But just because it's easy for computers to use and talk to, like if you build an interface for computers specifically that is easy for them to navigate, then they will be used in agents. And I think that's a learning that a lot of developer tools companies are having. That's my Bolt launch story and Netlify CLI stuff. And then I just wanted to come back to like the web containers things, right? Like I think you put a lot of weight on the technical moats. I think you also are just like very good at product. So you've like built a better agent than a lot of people, the rest of us, including myself, who have tried to build these things and we didn't get as far as you did. Don't shortchange yourself on products. But I think specifically on infra, on like the sandboxing, like this is the thing that people really want. Alessio has backed E2B, which we'll have on at some point, talking about like the sort of the server full side. But yours is, inside of the browser, serverless. It doesn't doesn't cost you anything to serve one person versus a million people. It doesn't cost you anything. I think that's interesting. I think in theory, we should be able to like run tests because you can run the full backend. Like you can run Git, you can run Node, you can run maybe Python someday. We talked about this. But ideally, you should be able to have a full agentic loop, running code, seeing the errors, correcting code, and just kind of self-healing, right? Like, I mean, isn't that the dream?
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. At least in Bolt, we've got a good amount of that today. I mean, there's a lot more for us to do, but one of the nice things, because like in web container, there's a lot of kind of stuff. You go Google like, turn Docker container into Wasm. Like you'll find a lot of stuff out there that will do that. The problem is it's very big, it's slow, and that ruins the experience. And so what we ended up doing is just writing an operating system from scratch that was just purpose built to, run in a browser tab. And the reason being is, these Docker to Wasm things will give you an image that's like 60 to 100 meg, maybe more, and our OS, kind of clocks in. I think we're in like maybe a megabyte or less or something like that. I mean, it's really, really, stripped down.
This is all basically the task involved, as I understand it. It's mapping every single Linux syscall to some kind of WebAssembly implementation.
But more or less, and then there's a lot of things actually, like when you're looking at a dev environment, there's a lot of things that you don't need that a traditional OS is going to have, right? Like, audio drivers, or there's just tons of things,
oh, yeah,
right?
That goes.
Yeah, you can just kind of, you can kind of toss them. Or alternatively, what you can do is you can actually be, the nice thing, and this kind of comes back to the origins of browsers, which is, they're at the beginning of the web in, the late 90s, there was, two very different kind of visions for the web, where Alan Kay vehemently disagreed with the idea that it should be document based, which is, what Tim Berners-Lee, and that's kind of what ended up winning was this document based kind of browsing documents on the web thing. Alan Kay, he's got this like very famous quote where he said, you want web browsers to be mini operating systems. They should download little mini binaries and execute with like a little mini virtualized operating system in there. And what's kind of interesting about the history, not to geek out on this aspect, but what's kind of interesting about the history is both of those folks ended up being right. Documents were actually the pragmatic way that the web was, became the most ubiquitous platform in the world, to the degree now that this is why WebAssembly has been invented, is that we need to do more low-level things in a browser. Same thing with WebGPU, et cetera. And so all these APIs, to build an operating system came to the browser. And that was actually the realization we had in 2017 was, holy heck, like you can actually, service workers, which were designed for allowing your app to work offline. That was the kind of the key one where it was like, wait a second, you can actually now run web servers within a browser. Like you can run a server that you open up. That's wild. And
like full Node.js.
Full Node.js. Like that capability. Like I can have a URL that's programmatically controlled by a web application itself. Boom. Like the web can build the web. The primitive is there. Everyone at the time, like we talked to people that like worked on, Chrome and V8 and they're like, I don't know. So, but it's one of those things you just kind of have to go do it to find out. So we spent a couple of years, working on it and got it to work. And back in 2021 is when we kind of put the first like beta of Web Container online. But
in partnership with Google, right? Like Google actually had to help you get over the finish line with some stuff.
100%, because over the years of when we were doing the R&D on the thing, kind of the biggest challenge, the two ways that you can kind of test how powerful and capable a platform are, the two types of applications are, one, video games, right? Because they're just very compute intensive, a lot of calculations that have to happen, right? The second one are IDEs, because you're talking about actually virtualizing the actual runtime environment you are in to actually build apps on top of it, which requires sophisticated capabilities, a lot, access to a good amount of compute power, right, to effectively, building app in app sort of thing. So those are the stress tests. So if your platform is missing stuff, those are the things where you find out. Those are the people building games and IDEs. They're the ones filing bugs on operating system level stuff, and for us, browser level stuff. And so, what ended up happening is we were just hammering, the Chromium bug tracker, and they're like, who are these guys? And they were amazing because just making Chrome DevTools be able to debug. It wasn't originally built right for debugging an operating system, right? They've been phenomenal working with us and just kind of really pushing the limits. But that it's a rising tide that's kind of lifted all boats, because now there's a lot of different types of applications that you can debug with Chrome DevTools that run in a browser that runs more reliably, because just the stress testing that we and games that are coming to the web are kind of pushing as well. But
that's awesome. About the testing, I think like most, let's say, coding assistant from different kinds will need this loop of testing and even I would add code review to some extent that you mentioned.
How is testing different from code review?
Code review could
just
be, for
PR
example, PR review is like a code review that is done at the point of when you want to merge branches. But I would say that code review, for example, checks best practices, maintainability, etc.
It's not just like CI, but it's more than CI.
And testing is like more like checking functionality, etc. So it's different. We call, by the way, all of these together code integrity, but that's a different story. Just to go back to the testing and
still
specifically.
Here? Yeah, it's since the first slide.
Yeah, we're consistent. So if we go back to the testing, I think like it's not surprising that for us testing is important and for Bolt it's testing important. But I want to shed some light on a different perspective of it. Like, let's think about autonomous driving. Those startups that are doing autonomous driving for highway and autonomous driving for the city. And I think like we saw the autonomy of the highway much faster and reaching to level, 4 or so, much faster than those in the city. Now, in both cases, you need testing, quote unquote testing, verifying validation that you're doing the right thing on the road and you're reading and etc. But it's probably like so different in the city that it could be like actually different technology. And I claim that we're seeing something similar here. So when you're building the next Wix, and if I was them, I was like looking at you and being a bit scared. That's what you're disrupting, what you just said. Then basically, I would say that, for example, the UX UI is freaking important, and because you're more aiming for the end user. In this case, maybe it's an end user that doesn't know how to develop. For developers, it's also important, but let alone those that do not know to develop, they need a slick UI UX. And I think like that's one reason, for example, I think Cursor have like really good technology. I don't know the underlying, what's under the hood, but at least what they're saying. But I think also their UX UI is great. It's a lot because they did their own ID. While if you're aiming for the city AI, suddenly like there's a lot of testing and code review technology that it's not necessarily like that important. For example, let's talk about integration tests. Like probably like a lot of what you're building in Bolt at the moment is isolated like applications. Maybe the vision or the end game is maybe like having one solution for everything. Like it could be that eventually the highway AI companies will go into the city and the other way around. But at the beginning, there's a difference. And integration tests are a good example. I guess they're a bit less important. And when you think about enterprise software, they're really important. So to recap, like I think like the idea of looping and verifying your test and verifying your code in different ways, testing or code review, etc., seems to me important in the highway AI and the city AI, but in different ways and different critical for the city, even more and more variety. Actually, I was looking to ask you what kind of loops you guys are doing. For example, when I'm using Bolt and I'm enjoying it a lot, then I do see sometimes you're trying to catch the errors and fix them. And also, I noticed that you're breaking down tasks into smaller ones and then etc., which is already a common notion for a year ago. But it seems like you're doing it really well. So if you're willing to share anything about it.
Yeah. I realized I never actually hit the punchline of what I was saying before. I mentioned the point about us kind of writing an operating system from scratch, because what ended up being important about that is that, to your point, it's actually a very, compared to if you're running Cursor on anyone's machine, you kind of don't know what you're dealing with the OS you're running on. There could be an error happens. It could be like a million different things, right? There could be some config. It could be God knows what, right? The thing with web containers, because we wrote the entire thing from scratch, it's actually a unified image, basically. And we can instrument it at any level that we think is going to be useful, which is exactly what we did when we started building Bolt, is we instrumented stuff at the process level, at the runtime level, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Stuff that would just be not impossible to do on local, but to do that in a way that works across any operating system, whatever, would just be insanely difficult to do right and reliably. And that's what you saw when you've used Bolt, is that when an error actually will occur, whether it's in the build process or the actual web application itself is failing or anything kind of in between, you can actually capture those errors. And today it's a very primitive way of how we've implemented it, largely because the product just didn't exist 90 days ago. So we got some work ahead of us and we got to hire some more a little bit. But basically we present it, we say, hey, here's kind of the things that went wrong. There's a fix it button, and then then an ignore button. And then you can just hit fix it. And then we take all that telemetry through our agent, you run it through our agent and say, kind of, here's the state of the application. Here's kind of the errors that we got from Node.js or the browser or whatever, and like and it can take a crack at actually solving it. And it's actually pretty darn good at being able to do that. That's kind of been closing the loop and having it be a reliable kind of base has seemed to be a pretty big upgrade over doing stuff locally, just because I think that's a pretty key ingredient of it. And yeah, I think breaking things down into smaller tasks, like that's kind of a key part of our agent. I think like Claude did a really good job with artifacts. And I think, us and kind of everyone else has kind of taken their approach of like actually breaking out certain tasks in a certain order into, kind of a concrete way. And so actually the core of Bolt.new, we actually made open source. So you can actually go and check out like the system prompts and et cetera, and you can run it locally and whatever have you. So anyone that's like interested in this stuff, I'd highly recommend taking a look at. There's not a lot of like stuff that's like open source in this realm. That was one of the fun things that we thought would be cool to do, and people seem to like it. I mean, there's a lot of forks and people adding different models and stuff, so it's been cool to see.
Yeah, I'm happy to add. I added real-time voice for my OpenAI Dev Day demo, and it was really fun to hack with. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to steal your code back into our because I want that mode.
It's funny because I built on top of the fork of Bolt.new that already has the multi-LLM thing, and so you just told me you're going to merge that in. So then you're going to merge 2 layers of forks down into this thing. So it'll be fun.
Heck yeah.
Just to touch on like the environment, Itamar, you maybe go into the most complicated environments that even the people that work there don't know how to run. How much of an impact does that have on your performance? Like, is most of the work you're doing actually figuring out environment and like the libraries? Because I'm sure they're using outdated version of languages. They're using outdated libraries. They're using forks that have not been on the public internet before. How much of the work that you're doing is like there versus like at the LLM level?
One of the reasons I was asking about, what are the steps to break things down, because it really matters, what's the tech stack, how complicated the software is. It's hard to figure it out when you're dealing with the real world, any environment of enterprise, the city, when I'm while maybe sometimes I think you do enable and Bolt to install stuff, but it's quite a controlled environment, and that's a good thing to do, because then you narrow down and it's easier to make things work. So definitely there are 2 dimensions. I think actually spaces. One is the fact just installing our software without yet
doing anything,
making it work, just installing it, because we work with enterprise and Fortune 500, etc. Many of them want on-prem solution. So
you have how many deployment options?
Basically, we did a metrics say 96 options because there are different dimensions. Like for example, one dimension we connect to your code management system, to your Git. So are you having GitHub, GitLab,
Subversion?
Is it on cloud or deployed on-prem? Just an example. Which model agree to use? Is it APIs or ours? We have our own models.
Is it TestGPT or something?
We started with TestGPT. It was a huge mistake name. It was cool back then, but I don't think it's a good idea to name a model after someone else's model. Anyway, that's my opinion. So
I'm interested in these learnings, things that you changed your mind on.
Eventually, when you're building a company, you're building a brand, and you want to create your own brand. By the way, when I thought about Bolt.new, I also thought about if it's not a problem, because when I think about Bolt, I do think about a couple of companies that already call this way.
Curse companies.
Yeah, so.
You could call it Qodium just to.
Okay, thank you. Touche.
Yeah, you got to imagine the board meeting before we launched Bolt. One of our investors, you can imagine they're like, "Are you sure?" Because from the investment side, there's kind of a famous, notorious Bolt, and they're like, "Are you sure you want to go with that name?"
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely.
At this point, we have actually 4 models. There is a model for autocomplete. There is a model for the chat. There is a model dedicated for code review, and there is a model that is for code embedding. Actually, if you might notice that there isn't a good code embedding model out there. Can you name one? That would dedicated for code. I can't share more than that.
There's code indexing, and then you can do sort of the hide for code, and then you can embed the descriptions of the code.
Yeah, but you do see a lot of type of models that are dedicated for embedding and for different spaces, different fields, etc. And I'm not aware, and I know that if you go to the Bedrock, try to find there is a few embedding models, but none of them are specialized for code.
Is there a benchmark that you would tell us to pay attention to?
Yeah, so it's coming. Wait for that. Anyway, like we have our models, and just to go back to the option, the 96 option of deployment. So I'm closing the brackets for us. So one is like dimension of like what Git deployment you have. The other, like what models do you agree to use? The other could be like if it's air gapped completely, or you want VPC, and then you have Azure, GCP, and AWS, which is different. Do you use Kubernetes or do not? Like because we want to exploit that. There are companies that do not do that, etc. I guess you know what I mean. So that's one thing. And considering that we are dealing with want to solve for enterprise, we needed to deal with that. So you asked me about like how complicated it is to solve that complex code. I said it's just a deployment part. And then like now to the software, we see a lot of different like challenges. For example, some companies, they did actually a good job to build a lot of microservices. Let's not get to if it's good or not, but let's for a second assume that it is a good thing. A lot of microservices, each one of them has their own repo, and now you have tens of thousands of repos. And you as a developer want to develop something, and I remember me for coming to a corporate for the first time. I don't know where to look at, like where to find things. So just doing a good indexing for that is like a challenge. And moreover, the regular indexing, the one that you can find. Well, we wrote a few blogs on that. By the way, we also like have some open source, like different than yours, but actually 3 and growing. Then it doesn't work. You need to let the tech leads in the companies influence your indexing. For example, mark with different repos with different colors. This is a high quality repo. This is a lower quality repo. This is a repo that we want to deprecate. This is a repo we want to grow, etc. And let that be part of your indexing. And only then, like things actually work for enterprise, and they don't get to a fatigue of, oh, this is awesome. Oh, but I'm starting, like it's annoying me. I think Copilot is an amazing tool, but I'm quoting others, meaning GitHub Copilot, that they see not so good retention of GitHub Copilot in enterprise.
Ooh, spicy.
I saw snapshots of people like, and we have customers that are Copilot users as well. And also I saw like research, some of them is public, by the way, between 38 to 50% retention for users using Copilot in enterprise. Ooh. So it's not so good, right? By the way, I don't think it's that bad, but it's not so good. So I think that's a reason, because it helps you like autocomplete, but then, and especially if you're working on your repo alone, but if it's need that context of remote repos, that your code base, that's hard. So to make things work, there's a lot of work on that, like giving the controllability for the tech leads, for the developer platform or developer experience department in the organization, to influence how things are working. A short example, because already long ago, if you have like really old legacy code, probably some of it is not so good anymore. If you just fine tune on these code base, then there's a bias to repeat those mistakes or old practices, etc. So like you need, for example, as I mentioned, to enable like to influence that. For example, in Qodo, you can have a markdown of best practices by the tech leads, and Qodo will include that and relate to that, and will not offer like suggestions that are not according to the best practices. Just as an example, okay? So like that's just a short list of things that you need to do in order to deal with like you mentioned, the 100 to 100.1 to 100.2 version of software.
I just want to say what you're doing is extremely impressive, because it's a very difficult. I mean, the business of Stackblitz, kind of before Bolt came online, was we sold a version of our IDE that went on-prem. So I understand what you're saying about the difficulty of selling on, getting stuff just working on-prem. Holy heck! I mean, that is extremely hard. I guess the question I have for you is, I mean, we were just doing that with kind of Kubernetes-based stuff. But the spread of Fortune 500 companies that you're working with, how are they doing the inference for this? Are you kind of plugging into Azure's OpenAI stuff and AWS's Bedrock, Claude stuff, or are they just like running stuff on GPUs? Like, what is that like? How are these folks approaching that? Because man, what we saw in the enterprise side, I mean, I gotta imagine that that's a huge challenge.
Everything you said and more. Like, just an example, like someone could be, and I don't think any of these is bad. Like they made their decision. Like for example, some people I want only AWS and VPC on AWS no matter what. And then some of them, like there's a subset, I would say, I'm willing to take models only from Bedrock and not ours. And we have a problem because there is no good code embedding model on Bedrock, and that's part of what we're doing now with AWS to solve that. We solve it in a different way, but if you are willing to run on AWS VPC, but run models on GPUs or Inferentia, like the new version and the more coming out, then our models can run on that. But everything you said is right. Like we see like on-prem deployment where they have their own GPUs. We see Azure where you're using OpenAI Azure. We see cases where you're running on GCP and they want OpenAI. Like this cross case, although there is Gemini or even Sonnet, I think is available on GCP, just an example. So all the options, that's part of the challenge. I admit that we thought about it, but it was even more complicated. And it took us a few months to actually, that metrics that I mentioned, to start like clicking each one of the blocks there.
I mean, a few months is impressive. I mean, honestly, just that's okay. And every one of these enterprises their networking is different. Everything's different. Yeah. Every single one is different.
I see you understand.
Yeah. So that just cannot be understated. like that it is. That's extremely impressive. Hats off. Because
it could be, by the way, like for example, we're only AWS. But our GitHub enterprise is on-prem. We forgot. So we need like a private link or whatever, like every time like that. It's not, and you do need to think about it if you want to work with enterprise. And it's important. Like I understand I respect their point of view.
And this primarily impacts your architecture, your tech choices. Like you can't choose some vendors because
definitely. To be frank, it makes it hard for a startup because it means that we want everyone to enjoy all the variety of models. By the way, it was hard for us with our technology. I want to open a bracket, like a window. I guess you're familiar with our AlphaCodium, which is an open source.
We got to go over that.
So I'll do that quickly.
A pin in that,
Actually, we didn't have it in the last episode, so okay.
Okay, we'll come back to that later, but let's talk about...
So just like shortly, and then we can double click on AlphaCodium. But AlphaCodium is a open source tool. You can go and try it and lets you compete on Codeforces is a website and a competition, and actually reach a master level, like 95% with a click of a button. You don't need to do anything. And part of what we did there is taking a problem and breaking it to different like smaller blocks. And then the models are doing much better job. Like we all know it by now that taking small tasks and solving them. By the way, even O1, which is supposed to be able to do system 2 thinking, like Greg from OpenAI hinted, is doing better on these kind of problems, but still it's very useful to break it down for O1, despite O1 being able to think by itself. And that's what we presented like just a month ago. OpenAI released that now they are doing 93 percentile with O1 IOI, left an International Olympiad Information. Sorry, I forgot exactly. I told you I forgot. And we took their O1 preview with AlphaCodium and did better. Like it just shows like, and there is a big difference between the preview and the IOI. It shows like that these models are not still system 2 thinkers, and there's a big difference. So
maybe they're not complete system 2. Yeah, they need some guidance.
I call them system 1.5. We can dive into that. I thought about it. Like, I care about this philosophy stuff. And I think like we didn't see it even close to a system 2 thinking. I can elaborate later. But closing the brackets, like we take AlphaCodium and as our principle of thinking, we take tasks and break them down to smaller tasks. And then we want to exploit the best model to solve them. So I want to enable anyone to enjoy O1 and Sonnet and Gemini 1.5, etc. But at the same time, I need to develop my own models as well because some of the Fortune 500 want to have all air-gapped or whatever. So that's a challenge. Now you need to support so many models, and to some extent, I would say that the flow engineering, the breaking down to different blocks is a necessity for us. Why? Because when you take a big block, a big problem, you need a very different prompt for each one of the models to actually work. But when you take a problem and break it into small tasks, we can talk how we do that. then the prompt matters less. What I want to say, like all this, like as a startup trying to do different deployment, getting all the juice that you can get from models, etc., is a big problem. And one need to think about it. And one of our mitigation is that process of taking tasks and breaking them down. That's why I'm really interested to know how you guys are doing it. And part of what we do is also open source, so you can see.
There's a lot in there. But yeah, flow over prompt, I do believe that does make sense. I feel like there's a lot that both of you can sort of exchange notes on breaking down problems, and I just want you guys to just go for it. Whatever. Like this is fun to watch.
Yeah, I mean, what's super interesting is the context you're working in is because for us too with Bolt, we've started thinking because our kind of existing business line was going behind the firewall, right? We were like, how do we do this? Adding the inference aspect on, we're like, okay, how does, because there's not a lot of prior art, right? I mean, like this is all new, this is all new. Yeah. So I definitely am going to have a lot of questions for you.
I'm here. We're very open, by the way. We have a paper on it, a blog, like whatever.
The AlphaCodium GitHub, and we'll put all this in the show notes.
Yeah, and even the new results of 01, we published it. And
I love that. And I also I think spiritually, I like your approach of being transparent and, because I think there's a lot of hypium around the AI stuff. And a lot of it is it's just like you have these companies that are just kind of keep their stuff close source and then just max hype it, but then it's kind of nothing. And I think it kind of gives a bad rep to the incredible stuff that's actually happening here. And so I think it's stuff like what you're doing where, true merit, and you're cracking open actual code for others to learn from and use, that strikes me as the right approach. And it's great to hear that you're making such incredible.
I have something to share about the open source. Like most of our tools are, we have like an open source version and then like a premium pro version, but it's not an easy decision to do that. I actually want to ask you about your strategy, but I think like in your case, there is, in my opinion, relatively a good strategy where a lot of parts of open source but then you have the deployment and the environment, which is not, right, if I get it correctly. And then there's a clear, like almost Hugging Face like model. Like, yeah, you can do that, but why should you try to deploy it yourself, deploy it with us? But in our case, and I'm not sure you're not going to hit also some competitors, and I guess you are. I wanted to ask you, for example, on some of them. In our case, like one day we looked on one of our competitors that is doing code review. We're a platform. We have like the code review, the testing, etc., spread over the ID, the Git. And in each agent, we have a few startups or a big incumbents that are doing only that. So we noticed one of our competitors having not only a very similar UI of our open source, but actually even our typo. And you sit there and you kind of like, we're not that good. Like we don't use enough like Grammarly or whatever. And and we had like a couple of these and we saw it there. And then it's a challenge. And I want to ask you, Bolt is doing so well, and then you open sourced it. So I think I know what my answer was. I gave it before, but still interesting to hear what you think.
Geohot said back, I think when he was I don't know what he's up to at this exact moment, but I think when on Comma AI, all that stuff's open source, and someone had asked him like, why is this open source? And he's like, if you're not actually confident that you can go and crush it and build the best thing, then you should probably keep your stuff closed source, right? Like that. He said something akin to that. I'm probably kind of butchering it, but I thought that was it was kind of a really good point. And that's not to say that you should just open source everything, because for obvious reasons, there's like kind of strategic things you have to kind of take in mind. But I actually think a pretty liberal approach, as liberal as you kind of can be, it can really make a lot of sense, because that is so validating that like one of your competitors is taking your stuff and they're like, yeah, like let's just kind of tweak the styles and clearly, right? I think it's kind of healthy because it keeps. I'm sure back at HQ that day when you saw that, you're like, whoa, all right, well we have to grind even harder, right, to make sure we stay ahead. And so I think it's actually a very useful, motivating thing for the teams, because you might feel this period of comfort. I think a lot of companies will have this period of comfort where they're not feeling the competition, then one day they get disrupted. So kind of putting stuff out there and letting people push it forces you to face reality soon, right? And actually feel that incrementally so you can kind of adjust course. And that's for us. The open source version of Bolt has had a lot of features people have been begging us for, like persisting chat messages and checkpoints and stuff. Within the first week, that stuff was landed in the open source versions. And they're like, why can't you ship this? It's in the open source. People have forked it. And, and we're trying to keep our servers and GPUs online. Like but it's been great because it's, like the folks in the community did a great job, kept us on our toes, and we've got to know most of these folks too at this point that have been building these things. And so it actually was very instructive. Like, okay, well, if we're going to go kind of land this, there's some UX patterns we can kind of look at, and the code is open source to this stuff. What's great about these, what's not. So anyway, so I think that's anyways, net, I think it's awesome. I think from a competitive point of view for us, I think in particular, what's interesting is the kind of the core technology of Web Container going, and I think that right now there's really nothing that's kind of on par with that. And we also we have a business of, because Web Container runs in your browser, but to make it work, you have to install stuff from npm. You have to make CORS bypass requests, connect to databases, which all require server side proxying or acceleration. And so we actually sell Web Container as a service. The original, one of the core reasons we open sourced kind of the core components of Bolt when we launched was that we think that there's going to be a lot more of these AI in your browser AI code gen experiences, kind of like what Anthropic did with Artifacts and Claude.
By the way, Artifacts uses web containers. Not yet.
No, yeah.
Should I strike that?
I think that they've got their own thing at the moment, but there's been a lot of interest in web containers from folks doing things in that sort of realm, and in the AI labs and startups and everything in between. And so I think there'll be, I imagine, a good over the coming months there'll be lots of things to being announced to folks kind of adopting it. But yeah, I think effectively.
Well, okay, I'll say this: if you're a large model lab and you want to build sandbox environments inside of your chat app, you should call Eric.
But wait. I have a question about that.
What?
Yeah.
I think OpenAI, they felt that people are not using their model as they would want to, so they built ChatGPT. But I would say that ChatGPT now defines OpenAI.
Yeah.
I know they're doing a lot business from their APIs, but still, is this how you think? Isn't Bolt.new is your business now? Why don't you focus on that instead of the?
What's your advice as a founder?
Well, you're right. And so going into it, we were like, okay, but Bolt.new, this thing is super cool. And we think people are stoked. Well, we think people will be stoked. But we were like, maybe this will add, at best case scenario, after month one, we'd be mind blown if we added a couple $100K of ARR or something, And we were like, but we think there's probably going to be an immediate huge business, because there was some early pull on folks wanting to put Web Container into their product offerings, kind of similar to what Bolt is doing or whatever. We were actually prepared for the inverse outcome here, but I guess we've seen pull on both. But I mean, what's happened with Bolt, and you're right, it's actually the same strategy as OpenAI or Anthropic, where we have our ChatGPT to OpenAI's APIs is Bolt to Web Container, and so that's it. We've kind of taken that same approach, and we're seeing, I guess, kind of some of the similar results. Except right now the revenue side is extremely lopsided to Bolt, right?
I think if you ask me what's my advice, I think you have three options. One is to focus on Bolt. The other is to focus on the Web Container. The third is to raise $1 billion or whatever and do them both. I'm serious. I think otherwise you need to choose. And if you raise enough money, and I think it's big bucks, because you're going to be chased by competitors, and I think it will be challenging to do both. And maybe you can. I don't know. We do see these numbers right now raising above $100 million even without having a product.
Yeah.
You can see these.
It's excellent advice, and I think what's been amazing, but also kind of challenging, as you kind of we're trying to forecast. Okay, well, where are these things going? Because I mean, in the initial weeks, I think us and all the investors in the company that we were kind of sharing this with, it was like, this is cool. Okay, we added 500K. Wow, that's crazy. Wow, we're at $1 million now. Okay, you kind of most things you have this kind of the TechCrunch launch of initiation, and then the thing of sorrow, and this is just we haven't. If there's going to be a downtrend, it's just not coming yet. Now that we're kind of looking ahead, we're 6 weeks in, so now we're getting enough confidence in our convictions to go, okay, this kind of seems to be the trend line, and kind of how we should go.
I'll tell you another reason why I think where is Jasper?
They actually just announced some new numbers recently. They're still surviving. They have gone down a lot. I think the peak that I heard was 100 billion ARR, and
right.
then they died.
And now there's tens of these. So I think like and their success was phenomenal. Like what I see at Bolt, and I think like if you want to keep that, probably. Who am I? Like I'm just like giving my.
I think you're right.
You need to focus because you are going to see like Wix. I think like you're disrupting their market, and you open sourced some of it, and they have containers, I believe, and you'll need to fight. Like I can tell you that when we open source, I share with you like a small competitor, but I can tell you I have a friend who's built $1 billion company and more. Like when we released AlphaCodium, he like sent me a private email asking, "What the fuck did you just do? Like why did you release that?"
You should have kept it.
Yeah, like you released that open source. Like I'm thinking build some stuff, and now I can do that much more easily. Like I can tell you my answer, and I thought that maybe you will answer as well. Although like I think Bolt is already very promising. For us, like AlphaCodium 1 is like GPT-1. I agree with you. Like being open and open source, etc., really helps to improve the product, community, etc. But at some point, OpenAI closed their GPT 3.5 or whatever, and that was part of my answer. Like AlphaCodium is the agent that is compatible with GPT-1, and there is a lot to do for these agents to actually get that like moment that we had with GPT 3.5, etc. as agents.
Yeah, I think you're dead right, and I think it just comes back to what GeoHot said, right? It's like if you want to win, there's no other option than out hustling everyone else, and so I think that's kind of and then out hustling in the sense really meaning building the best product, building the best experiences, and I think that's the only way, kind of almost any route, and kind of open source some of the stuff just kind of burns the ships in a sense, right? And then maybe that's the simplest way of saying it. Just you're burning the ships, but also it builds a lot of goodwill. There's tons of benefits to it. Right?
Yeah, Salesforce are doing that, right? They're now going to be Agentforce or whatever. So you can also.
We're going to try to get Mark on the podcast, and Decibel is good friends with Salesforce. Any parting thoughts? Any trends that you're like super excited about?
If we're talking about trends, I go back to our original podcast where we talked about like the idea that the software world is like built from specs, test, and code. And I think like you can see that like one dimension are company startups that are rethinking the entire like development environment, like I think like Bolt, etc. And another dimension is like, where is their focus? Is it like on the spec, is on the test, and on the code? And I think like it's interesting to see that from that view. We'll see more startup and more amazing announcement like of new directions, new philosophy. So I think we'll see startup like focusing, let's build everything from the spec. To some extent, I would say that like Bolt is, from my understanding, you can say better, somewhere in the line between the spec and the code, because you start, like I saw your demos, you're trying to describe like things like not just in one row, because you want to look like you wanted it. So it's on that edge between connecting between spec and code. And you see others like I think like all the IDEs, most of them are the new IDEs with the fork are there. We are like more focused from the test and to the code and to the spec, etc. So these are the trends. I think like we will see that, and I think like the another dimension to consider is like, is it more for the highway AI, for the developers, maybe not even like a technical person, or is it for the enterprise? And that also like gives you like different products if they are aiming for different ICP, different ideal client profile. They will approach this triangle of spec and test and code, and that's like how I see the world. And what I'm noticing is that we're seeing more and more of those new startups, new interfaces that are not focused on code. For example, talking more about the spec, talking more about the testing. Eventually, I think that's where the world is going to. Like the code is going to be there, and there will be developers, etc. But as agent improves and capabilities of the LLMs and integrations to different parts of the development environment, we're going to see more and more like focusing on the spec and the test. Basically, like these two might unite, the spec and the test, because you can say that tests are runnable specs, right, to some extent. So like that's another way to look on it. Yeah, that's
it's literally on the slide here, runnable tests, right here.
Yeah, I'm consistent.
How consistent?
Look, I talked about System 1 and System 2 like more than a year ago.
Yeah.
And now with
coming.
01, people are talking about
We're halfway there.
System 1. But I think we'll talk about it again, because I think they're totally wrong about 01 being a System 2. So like it is now like in the hype or whatever talking about that, but I think like the agents are the one that will take us towards System 2, and the more they are aware of their environment and aware of that sometimes they don't know what they don't know, then we'll really get to System 2. But that's like a deeper discussion.
It's a deeper discussion. Love the philosophy talk that we had last time as well. All right, so we're back onto Bolt, and Itamar had to leave for another interview. But we were just talking about like what happened post-launch, right? Yeah. And I held this like sort of emergency council of advisors for you because we had never seen this before, and I was like, okay, I'm going to call all the smartest people I know to join this thing,
which was extremely helpful. And I'm so appreciative. There's been a handful of amazing folks,
you made one hire out of that.
Yeah, because it was like I can't remember where we were at kind of ARR wise when I messaged you.
It was like you messaged me at like 2 or 3.
Okay,
and then by the time we got everything together, it was 4.
Yeah,
and then now it's at.
Since Eric sat down 5 minutes.
But I mean,
it sounds like it's accelerated because you told me it was like 100K, 200K a day.
Yeah,
and now it's accelerated.
Yeah, this past. I mean, every week has been kind of a blowout week as far as.
Is it TikTok?
We are digging into the degree that we can of just like where all this stuff's coming from. I mean, there's a ton of word of mouth, right? So that you can't just like look by refer, right? So just a ton of direct. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of TikTok. There's a ton of YouTube. It's kind of, I think, been a sensation in these sort of like, entrepreneurial, build your own SaaS, indie hacker, even developer circles. And I think too, like our team's been doing a really good job. Our folks just kind of like flipped a switch, and like people were just working through the weekends or whatever to get stuff fixed. And so the product, and you'll see people say this online. Like today, there was a tweet. Someone was like, yeah, I tried this like the first week and like couldn't get whatever to work. Came back today, 6 weeks later, and this is ridiculous. Like this is so good, right? And so I think there's been an incredible amount of improvement to the product, to the agent, also to like the underlying models too. Like Sonnet, they just happened to do an update on, with their latest like a couple of weeks ago, and so when we put our new agent online and the new Sonnet, we saw a huge bump in conversion just based on that. And so anyway, we've gone. I think when we were chatting, that must have been 3 weeks ago. Maybe an average of 100K ARR per day, and this week I will see. Yeah, I've said this every week, but we'll see if it holds. It's like kind of the past couple of days have been like 500,000 of ARR per day. Which insane. I mean, I think today we had our peak. We've had peak traffic. Just kind of set the previous. And that's kind of been every day this week. But anyways, I think things just continue to accelerate, which is kind of blowing my mind. Because it's just the sheer numbers of this stuff are just like mind-boggling.
I think you almost suffered from like the Twitter demo issues that other people had. Like the first time I saw Bolt, I saw the demo and I was like, oh, that's cool. Like I didn't go to try it because I was like, I've seen so many of these that it's like, I don't know if it's actually going to work.
Yep.
And then 2 days ago, I signed up to use it. I was building a Luma replacement. I'm done with Luma. And I was like, man, this thing really works. I was like, and I already knew you, of course. And I was like, man, this thing really works. What the fuck? I was like, it's actually, I don't know if it's like the model, if it's like how you prompt it, but it's so good at coming out with like the simplest thing to implement. So the Luma example, right? So first I was like, create an RSVP page for an event. And it created a wedding RSVP. I don't know if it's your fault. I don't know if you bolted it into the model. And then I was like, well, now I need to have a way to create more events, and added that. And then I was like, now I need a way to like have an admin page to modify event. And maybe what I would have done as a developer is like, well, I'll create a different like admin view, with all the events, and then I'll have like the front end thing. And instead what it did is like, it created like a admin view toggle on top, and then like just a pencil button on every page to edit them in line, and that was it. And I was like, yeah, that works just as well. And like for the model, that's probably like the simplest way to do it because it like limits the amount of files that are there.
Yep.
Can you talk just more about how much of this is like the model coming out with it, how much you're prompting it to kind of like be very like compressed and concise?
A ton of it is the model, but I think what's interesting though is kind of the baseline model. If try and put it into like a way, if you had to quantify the effect, is obviously the model is like this sort of like 10x multiplier. How good the underlying model is, huge swing. And then kind of what you can do on top of that, you can squeeze out 3-4x kind of more. And so that's kind of where the realm of, prompt engineering and, multi-agent approaches, et cetera, kind of kick in. And so I think with us, our folks, like the guy on our side that, led the web engineering, like that kind of our core technology for the past 7 years here. His name's Dominic Elm, based out of Germany, and he was one of the founding engineers of the company. Previous to Stackblitz, he actually was doing machine learning, and he basically built a Stackblitz like online IDE for machine learning. So think like kind of like Google Colab sort of thing, or like Hugging Face has their kind of version of this. Back in 2016, it wasn't as much of a market for this stuff, but anyway, so he had been doing a lot of training ML models and that sort of thing. So I just as we began kind of dig into AI stuff over the past year, he's been kind of leading that off. And so a lot of it, I really attribute to Dom's specific angle, because he has deep understanding of our technology and how it works, because he's led the engineering on Web Container, but has a deep understanding of how these models work. Going and actually kind of writing out these, whether it's like the prompt engineering aspect of it or multi-agent or whatever have you, that's sort of like that much context, and the other folks in the team are in the same sort of spot. They've been working on this stuff. I think we've been able to squeeze out a lot more than I've seen almost anything else out there, at least in the term of building web apps, at least. But anyways, I think it's kind of just because we have more context on a fewer number of heads at the company, so we can kind of connect the dots a bit faster.
Yeah, that's part of the issue with the whole raise $1 billion thing. Like, you actually run very lean. And that's actually been to your advantage.
Totally, and I think I think we have to staff up, because we went from call it 0 customers to 20, 30,000 kind of in 6 weeks. We have to have certainly more customer support, customer success stuff, et cetera. But also just on engineering, we have to ramp up. But I do think that there's we saw this in the 2021 cycle, right? Where adding tons more people can be a thing that really hurts the company, because it's just harder. It's really hard to manage lots of people. If you're a big enough company to warrant a certain headcount, 100%, you kind of have to do it, right? But I think for us, it's worked just to really grow the team slowly and intentionally. And so I think we're going to take the same approach here at a bit of a faster clip than we were previously. But to me, that would just be general advice to startups, is like slowly, intentionally, as fast as you can to meet demand or whatever.
Part of what I felt like you're in a unique position to talk about, but also kind of what we went through in our call was, I have PMF, now what is kind of what I've been saying. And so I think the first answer is hire a data scientist. Yeah. Because we have to sort of figure out, like, from our data, you're now sitting on a ton of different customers, and we don't really know the different customer segments. You're starting to get an idea of churn. You're starting to get an idea of like segmentation. You already had data enrichment. One of my most interesting quotes from you from that session was that because you were selling to enterprise for so long, you had already set up all that stuff, and it just wasn't useful for a more sort of developer bottom-up centric approach.
Yeah, well, and particularly because for the first time in the company's history, we're selling primarily to almost non-developers. Yep. And so everything that all the playbooks we had, not relevant here, basically, right? So one of our investors I talked with earlier this week, it basically brought up a really great point, which is like, you are now a B2C company. Yeah. And how you operate needs to reflect that.
which is what? I don't know.
Which is basically, from an analytics perspective, you're tracking everything, right? And to your point, you have people kind of round the clock slicing and dicing data to understand who are these people coming in, who are the types of people you actually want to retain versus people that are just going to churn out. And that's okay, because they're not the actual ICP that you're going for, right? When you're building stuff for enterprise software, the bar is a lot lower. And so from the conversation before, one of the biggest, and this is kind of what we found with Stackblitz, which is kind of interesting. You mentioned it's as a startup, it's very hard to sell on-prem. Extremely true. But if you can do it, it's like the promised land, because these companies, they're Fortune 500s, they can write really large checks. And so when you're going and selling to them, it doesn't matter so much on your website. Sure, you want to track the conversion to the enterprise contact form or whatever, right? But what actually really matters is a lot of human touch points of, hey, we want to have a quarterly call after just getting them installed this stuff. There's a whole playbook for that. And you need to hire sales engineers that could be on the ground floor and helping people install it. Then after that, you got to, okay, how do we make sure they're kind of constantly successful? Because you can't access, our enterprise customer instances we have no idea how often they're using them. Why? Because the whole point is that we can't see what they're up to for good reason, right? Like they need to own their data. And so the way it's actually a very complicated problem of how do you have like build relationships where everyone's getting on calls, they can share kind of the telemetry that they can see within their instance, and you can kind of extrapolate that, make sure they're happy and successful. So there's a whole art of that, of doing enterprise well, that we've gone and done and closed these folks. Totally unrelated to doing B2C, completely unrelated for the most part. So anyway, so that we're, as a company, we're kind of reorienting, our focus on going and actually really leaning in on analytics, whatever have you. And fortunately, like my co-founder and I, the enterprise business of Stackblitz was the first time we had ever done enterprise. Primarily, like thanks to the company we did before, was B2C. Like we were selling people courses on how to do web development, basically, right? So a lot of the skill set that I had built up there, I able to pull that back off the shelf, dust it off, sharpen the blade, and we're doing email marketing, we're doing live streams, So anyway, so it's kind of cool to be shifting back to some of the stuff where we cut our teeth on back in the day.
How did you pick the pricing? Because I had to pay. And there's
that's fantastic. That's fantastic. You want to like slightly like
it's like you gotta pay. It's like you're running out of tokens, dude. I was like, fuck, I'm running out of tokens. Like I don't want to run out of tokens. But there's like 5 different tiers.
Yeah.
Right, which are kind of like token based and capacity based.
Yep.
How do you kind of reconcile that and the consumer side, where maybe the consumer doesn't even really need to know what a token is, right? Like on that, like your mom probably doesn't really care what an AI token is. How did you structure it to start? How did you come up with that? And then maybe ideas that you have to like improve or like modify that?
Totally. Yeah. So when we first launched, so Stackblitz is like, we were an enterprise play, right? And so when we launched in 2017, I think we tried pricing 2018 or 2019, like it was free for a long time. And then we had a $9 plan, and that was just the way it was. It was kind of like our $1.50 hot dog at Costco. It's kind of like this, just low price, it wasn't the primary rev driver. And we just wanted to, say, hey, pay for some more storage and private projects or whatever. And so we went to launch Bolt. Again, like our expectation was, hey, we'll probably get a good number of people that'll sign up and be excited about it. And, we're not too concerned. We were unprepared for the tsunami that hit. And so after going online, the first week we were like, wow, this is cool. It just kept growing. And then once we hit week 2, we were just $9 was, it's like the cheapest AI coding thing you can get, maybe other than Copilot, but like we were overrun by support tickets and just the sheer volume of people coming in, it just laws of supply and demand. We were like, okay, there's no way we can scale to meet this. Also, the people coming in are burning through their tokens, and there's no way to actually like buy more of these things. And $9 is just, you can't get that much inference out of that. And so here's the other thing that's interesting about Bolt compared to like something like Copilot or whatever. And this kind of tied this, sorry, a little bit of a roundabout way to answer your question, but basically what we ended up realizing is that when you use Copilot, what it's sending up, it doesn't provide a lot of context of your code base. They try and reduce the amount of context as much as they can. And I think, the origins of this stuff is everyone kind of wants this like low price point where it's like all you can eat. So it just kind of feels like, cause it's like, it almost like Netflix. It's like, I'll pay a thing and then I can just do as much of movie watching as I want. And I think that kind of mentality, when these first AI products came out, kind of makes sense. They're like, okay, well, we don't want to meter it because that doesn't feel good, right? But the problem is that then they're incentivized to not have it be able to capable. Like the more context you give it, the more it can do. And that's the magic of what we're doing with Bolt is we're giving it all the context we possibly can. And that's why you can go to it and say, make me an RSVP site. And it does it because it has context, the entire state of the application, et cetera, et cetera. And that's what makes it so accurate versus if you go to Copilot and say that, it'll be, it might punch out a React component that's the button to create the thing, but not actually more than that. So anyway, and at the time when people had bought the $9 plan, they were like, I want to give you more money. I want you to buy more tokens. How do I do that? And so our team scrambled that weekend. We just turned it around and just, we said, okay, well, what do we think is reasonable? And we said, okay, so let's go immediately double the prices of the base tier because it's just not enough what people are getting on for $9. So that seems reasonable. It's kind of in line with everyone else. And then we added $50, $100, and $200 plans because we're like, that should be enough. And so, so that's kind of the origins of it. And it was people that use it fall in love with it and they want to use more of it. And the problem is that inference is expensive. And so we're not actually taking, to date on the revenue we've done, we have not really taken a margin at all on this stuff because we're just trying to put all the value back into the folks that are using the tool and just getting the maximum amount of value out of it. But it's really key to the kind of the magic of the experience. And so the other thing kind of worth mentioning is there's kind of the ARR number, but then you can also buy additional tokens, just with usage-based billing effectively. And that's accounting for an additional 20, 30% of revenue that's coming to the company. People are actually using this to do their jobs. Like, think about a web development agency before this thing. They're going in using Figma to make a design. They have to pay a designer. They have to like punch that out into code, kind of manage. Maybe like Copilot can help a little bit with punching out this thing, that. They're coming to this thing. And there's just wild stories online where it's like, local bakery is like, we need a website. He's like, okay, well, I'm going to charge you $1,000. They're like, okay, that sounds great. Reasonable price. 30 minutes later, he's like, here's a deploy preview of your thing. How does that look? They're like, wow, holy crap.
I'm not giving you $1,000.
But they did. They were mind blown because they were like, this usually takes months.
Yeah.
So some of the biggest power users are people that build websites for a living because this is the alpha on this is insane.
That's almost like the gap, right? It's like, it used to be that if I ask you before this to do a website and in 30 minutes you return to me and you give me something, I'm like, you're probably just copying something else you've done before, you know? Versus now it's almost like it doesn't really matter how much time it takes you because everybody's going to be so fast with these things. It's more like the value. And that's why in your pricing tier was almost like there's only really going to be like either $20 a month users or like $1,000 a month users. It's almost like who's going to use the $50 a month because it's kind of like in between being infrequent user and being like a power user, So it makes sense that you have like a big part of like on demand on top of the tiers.
And on the 50, there's actually a lot of people on the one. I think it's because it's like enough to actually like for developers that are using this to just kind of like punch out components or designs or whatever, kind of gets them enough for, kind of in a given month or whatever. And so it's been interesting to kind of see the upgrades that happen. Yeah. But what's been kind of cool about the product is it's, and again, I think this is kind of novel and this is, us being maybe a little more transparent than we should be or something. But like, I suspect I think we're going to see a lot more of this because we're hitting an inflection point. Coming back to the Copilot thing, part of the problem before is that it didn't matter if you provided more context, the models just weren't good enough to know what to even do with it. That's not the case now. Just one story of like one of the first people, one of the first power users that adopted Bolt was this gal in Thailand who's a PM at a software banking company. And she had an idea for this app called viralhooks.ai, which is basically, it's a tool that if you want to make viral TikToks and stuff, it's like, what's the hook of the video to make people watch, right? And so basically you can go and like see, it goes and extracts hooks from other people's videos and helps you with like, AI to write your own. And she originally, the week before Bolt launch, she put that on Upwork. And, I think a developer in like Ukraine had quoted her, $5,000 and it's going to take like 3 months or something like that. Reasonable time frame, right? For an app like that, reasonable price. The week after that, Bolt came out, she bought the $50 plan and she had the app built within a week or two. And so you're talking about like,
this is Bolt.
That's it. And it's beautiful. She did an incredible job, right? And so the numbers are wild. $5,000, 3 months to $50 in like a week.
Yeah, you got to charge more. Right.
It's kind of like, there's people like when we've had a lot of people go, this pricing's insane. And we're like, well, we're not even taking really a margin at the moment on it, but when you compare that to the price of actually going and building, the cost of building quality software today, anyone who knows the price of building quality software, the alpha is obvious, right? It's a 99% cost reduction and 5x faster delivery time, so anyway, so that's, I think we're one of the first products that have actually come out kind of proving that in a revenue way. To kind of underscore the point, as you can imagine, we've had kind of venture capital firms kind of reach out, kind of curious, kind of what we're up to or whatever. And so one of the most there's kind of one of the most notable ones or whatever reached out. So we kind of sent them kind of our numbers. Actually, it was the investor update, Sean, that I think the one you saw. Kind of gave them a snapshot of it, and they one of their analysts accidentally replied all on what we had sent them, and with the analysis. And so on this part there, one of the things they said was, we haven't seen anything that's kind of eye-opening to see people going to $200 tier on this sort of thing. Haven't seen anything else like that in the space. Because I think this is very new because of the new model capabilities, right? Where people, it makes sense. Like, you're willing to pay more money for this stuff. So
this is something I've talked about before in terms of matching the dollar amount of spend to the capabilities of the AIs. The chart that I published in the past was, OpenAI has like 5 levels of AGI-ness, and level 1 is sort of like chatbots. Level 2 is reasoning. Level 3 is agents. 4 is organizations. 5 is something superhuman. I don't remember what the exact levels are, but each can sort of match each of them with like tiers. Like $20 is like the ChatGPT tier. $200 is where you're at. $2,000 is higher, 20,000, 200,000, right? Like you can see levels where it makes sense. I think Brightwave is also there, by the way. Like I don't know what Brightwave charges, but it's higher, right, than a ChatGPT, and like you have to deliver more value for that.
Yeah.
But you can do it now.
Yep.
So then why not? Everyone should do it.
I think we're going to see a lot more of this. I think we're going to see, and I think, for AI code gen specifically, this is the first moment where I think that there's been that moment where it goes from 0 to 1, where it's like, yep, the price, the value is so, like, of what you can get out of these things is so much higher than it was, 3-6 months ago, that I think we're going to see a lot more of this. Like, Bolt is I think one of the first things, but it's just to me it's inevitable that we're going to see many more things kind of leveraging this sort of use case and the amount of efficiency you can get out of using these systems, right? So
because the Bolt arbitrage would be quote the price based on the query.
You're selling high value tokens.
Yeah, it's like, hey, it's like your mom. It's like you wouldn't charge your mom $2,000 to tell her stories, but like this person doing an app and like a product on it.
Yeah.
You got to pay more, but it's hard right now. I understand it's like, it's really hard to figure out how much you can push it, how much value the person will get out of the thing, you know?
So I want to riff a little bit on like stuff like this, right? I think you nailed a lot with the design system. One of the differences between open source Bolt and the one that you have is actually like you spend a lot of time on the design system, I think, right? Most things just look great when they come out. But then there's also a whole back-end portion that they need. Was that a challenge? Is there anything that you sort of like figuring out that you want to riff on?
Yeah, so I think one of the main things, I think you hit the nail on the head, which is, kind of going into putting Bolt online. We originally, again, we've been selling to developers, and so we were kind of like, this is a tool for prototyping, and they'll download their code. But what we ended up finding in the early user testing was how important the deployment story was, and how, and this is something you said to me specifically. You're like, backend. Backend needs to be part of this, like logging in, like auth. I just to triple confirm, you were dead right. That has been the absolute number one thing that folks coming to Bolt, are looking to do, is build a real app with a backend with billing. And so one of this guy, Mauricio, he's one of our power users. He's like, there's 3 things that like every app that I'll ever want to build in Bolt, and any of these other people in this community, 3 things: a database, auth, and payments. Those 3 things, right? And so that's
admin dashboard.
We can do that pretty decently.
As in, every database needs an WP admin.
Yes, correct. Totally. And so so today I think like Viral Hooks, for example, I think she's using Firebase for auth and database and that sort of thing. So I think Firebase and Supabase, those are the 2 things that just work incredibly well. And so that's actually the point where we're at now, where, right now it's, folks have to still, kind of go to Supabase, manually spin up a thing, come back to Bolt, put the thing, it's like that sort of processing thing with Firebase. And each of those products are going to have their own little quirks that there's like kind of steps, right? And so
Boltbase.
Yeah, Boltbase. Yeah, I think initially we're like, okay, there should just be a way to like, for Bolt to just go and spin up these things on their behalf, and just both of them have APIs to do so.
I'll go even further, like have like pre-warm instances that you just assign, like it's already spun up, right? So it's like kind of serverless feeling, even though it's like not really.
Yeah.
But like just pre-warm and then just kind of assign it whenever someone like spins up an app.
Yeah, just keep one Firebase in the hopper, basically.
1, 10, 100, I don't know. More generally, this is what I felt that I wanted to do on our call, which is like when you have PMF, yes, you want to invest some time in like understanding your customers and do data analytics and like tighten things up in general, like tighten up the pricing, tighten up the cost and all that. But then like you also have to work on like what is next like the next level in growth. Like you can still inflect.
Yeah.
I don't know what that is, but I wanted to keep pushing you, and I don't know if I did. Mostly because I was serving as facilitator on that call. That's what I think. Like I think you got to still keep pushing the frontier, and I don't know what it is, but like I want to hear what you got thinking about.
I think there's we've addressed just a lot of the low hanging P0 stuff, and we've actually seen kind of the there's key moments where it's just kind of like been going like that, which has been cool because it's like, okay, well we're just getting started. This is just the fixing obvious things part. Fundamentally, I think what a lot of people are coming here to do is just how can we just make it faster to go from idea to production. And a lot of it is like when I have to go to Firebase, Supabase, spin something up, run a migrate, like add a table, but it's like the agent can do that, so that stuff should be baked in. Yeah, and same thing with the deployment side. It's like right now it's going to Netlify, but people have to create a Netlify account and go and do that, right? And so I think one of the things we're going to end up doing here is just having the hosting be baked in. And so I've been talking with Matt over at Netlify about this because they actually have a way to kind of
the white label stuff.
The white label stuff. And so because they're just going to make a website. And so it's.
That means also you take over domain registration.
Can you imagine, right? Like a couple months from now, you come to this thing, you're like, I want to make an RSVP site, right? And it's like, great. Do you have a name for it? Or do you want a domain? You're like, I don't know a name. It's like, well, here's like 10 options, and the .coms are available. Do they look good? Yep, that one does. Okay, we want to buy it.
Yeah.
Okay, great. It bought. The DNS is pointed at the thing. Should we start building this? Okay. Does this look good? Yep. Okay. Am I okay to push this to prod? Yep, that looks good. Like that's without leaving the product, right?
So to me, like Itamar was the first to actually say like you are the new Wix. I personally never thought about it that way. Wix is a $10 billion company. Where you want to go, because you still have a choice here.
From what we're hearing from the folks using the product, I think I don't even think Wix is even able to solve their need. But not to say that we don't want to, that what you're saying is not what we want, but I mean, like I think we want to solve folks' problems, and I think that there's a huge gap in the market of being able to build, kind of more sophisticated, high quality software like websites in a way that for someone who's a non-engineer. And so I think there's a huge market for that. And obviously, even if you're trying to build a wedding website, this is easier and faster, right? So I love it. Again, coming to the origins of why Albert, my co-founder, and I are doing this is we've always just loved building stuff on the web. It's like this. This is the tool from even when Stackblitz was just the IDE interface to the technology. It's like this is the thing we wish we had when we were 13 years old. And with Bolt, oh my God, this is the thing I wish we had when we were 13 years old. I'm so glad that my daughter's going to have this thing. So, anyways, I think it makes me pretty stoked that. People are going to be able to actually build amazing web applications that can do really sophisticated things, So I think the short answer is heck yeah. I mean, if that sort of market, totally right up our alley.
One other angle that I wanted to pursue was also the other languages. You're very JavaScript centric. We've talked about Python forever, Ruby maybe. Is that important? Like the previous generation of site builders were mostly Ruby shops.
Yeah.
And then some PHP. Do we want to capture that, or are we just like always bet on JavaScript and just let JavaScript take over the world?
I think we're certainly with great interest interested in other languages, and we have minimal support of Python and some C++ stuff in Web Container that you can run or whatever. I think especially with the stuff we're seeing though, it's the language is kind of ancillary to the thing.
Well, there's the ecosystem of I want to end up with a code base that I can hire humans on to do the stuff that Bolt cannot do.
Yeah, true. And I think in that sense, the JavaScript Node.js ecosystem is huge, well established. So I think you'd certainly be able to get people to work on this stuff. And I think the only thing that would be missing is are you building web apps that where a lot of the functionality is only in libraries that are in Python or something, right? And I think just kind of seeing the applications that are being built here, I think that'd be like data science and ML and that sort of thing. And so we're not seeing a lot of that stuff, but I think that's we're kind of more generic approaches like what Replic's doing, where they're spinning up, real VMs. You can kind of run anything. And I think they started off with doing Python servers. I haven't tried their new agent stuff that's based on
Replit agent. Yeah. We're close friends.
Yeah.
Replit has the database, the sort of live hosting, everything integrated that you're going to want to build. And I think you're on a collision course with them, to be honest.
We'll see, because I'm curious. You're not the first person to say that. I'm curious to see how it shakes out, because I think the challenge is focus. When you are what's kind of the end goal that you're
Replic's firmly for developers. You're positioning it for non-developers. Like that's
and even if focusing on a language or an ecosystem as well, because again, the problem is that these things can just break in a million ways, and so part of a lot of the work in making the experience better, like how do you get someone get an idea into their fingertips and live on prod, right? There's so much stuff in between there, and a lot of it is just errors that happen, and how do you handle those? And a lot of that comes down to having a giant database of common errors that you can maybe even fine tune stuff on at some point, right? So doing that on one ecosystem, you can move a lot faster than if you're trying to support a lot of different languages. However, it's like to the point of if you're kind of targeting developers, they may not need that level of kind of streamline, thing. I think that's kind of where I see the main divergence is that we are unabashedly focused on this ecosystem for building web apps.
Got it. You supported Vite forever.
Yeah, and so I'm very curious to see how it all shakes out, because I think what they're doing is actually, I'm very curious to see what Microsoft does, because if anyone is good at giving out VMs, tying it to a code editor, and putting AI in it, it's Satya. He's got a cloud. He's got VS Code. They got code spaces. They're in OpenAI now. They've got Anthropic in Copilot. I must imagine that they're cooking stuff over there.
Well, we'll make sure to ask him. Yeah, we have many friends from Microsoft listening to the pod.
So just to wrap, I don't know, is there anything else Bolt related? I just have one personal question before we wrap the pod.
Maybe just advice. Like now that you've been through this journey, right? Advice to your former self.
Oh, okay. At which point?
Advice to yourself, like thinking about, there are many founders out there with a business where they're working really hard at it, it's interesting, but it's not an AI business.
Yeah.
And you kind of took the plunge to invest in this, and it worked out for you. Maybe a lot of people are like, okay, this guy got lucky. Obviously, there's a little bit of luck in everything. But how do you improve your chances? Like, would you say go for it? Would you say everyone should go for it? How would you advise someone who was in your shoes and thinking about, maybe I should have a second product, maybe I should take this experiment, or maybe it doesn't work out? Like, what's the calculus here?
Yeah, we were deeply skeptical going. I remember the conversation you and I had. I was like, I think there's something here. At that point, we had built some amount, but I had waited a long time to give you the call. I
said, this was your moment.
Well, it was. So I remember specifically, though, at the beginning of the conversation with Sean, he and I sat down at a coffee shop in SF, and so I was kind of giving him the pitch of I think that, I can't remember the exact framing I said, but it was obvious that Sean had heard a lot of people say this exact thing to him over the past year or two, which is like, hey man, we've got an AI play. Like this is our thing plus AI equals this could be crazy. And Sean, you gave me this skeptical look, and I was like, I really think so. And kind of here's why, right? And I think that is internally being skeptical of just kind of going and jumping on hype trains is good, because it's like, I think your focus and your time and what you're putting your weight into is the most important thing when you're a founder. I think for us, we actually, again, like I had mentioned at the beginning of this, we had tried Bolt and didn't see the results, and that was like a 2-week sprint, and we rolled it back. Right, this isn't viable at this point. But then once we saw real tangible results of some of the new stuff, we're like, okay, that changes things. And I think a lot of it is going and finding that out for yourself, and then going and talking to the smartest people with more domain knowledge on that stuff than you have, and going, here's kind of what we found. Does this track? So when Sean and I met, and he and I kind of, he saw it, we talked through it, and he said, this is your moment. I specifically remember that because I walked away from that and I was like, holy shit, this is it. Like this, Sean's at the intersection of web and AI, and has has one of the best perspectives on this stuff of anyone I know. That put a huge, wind in our sails, honestly, of just like, okay, let's go and double down here, because we had conviction before, but having someone who's in the space independently kind of verify meant a lot, so
it makes me uncomfortable, but thank you.
I mean it. And I waited until I was pretty darn sure it was not going to be a waste of time to put it in front of me,
Cool. Well, that's all I have.
And then on the personal side, you had a baby in April. You ran an Ironman in October. Now it's November.
He did Ironman while launching Bolt.
Yeah, exactly. That's what
I was trying to schedule the call for him, and he was like, "Nope, I'm running."
Sorry, I'm swimming. It's like, hey, I'm on the swimming session.
And for those who don't know, actually, I did not know the distance of an Ironman.
Yeah.
It's 13 hours. Your time was 12:15.
Yeah, 12:15. Yeah,
12:15.
12:15.
Wow.
Every minute matters. Give me my minutes. No. It completely depends on the course and just the person or whatever, right? But yeah, I mean, it's
2.4 km open water swim.
Mile. Yeah, 2.4 miles.
Open water swim. 100 km. 100 km cycle.
Yeah, I think it's 112 mile bike.
And then marathon.
Then full 26.2 mile marathon. Yeah.
Crazy.
It was
why?
Yeah.
And you were not like a super endurance athlete before, right? Let's make this clear.
Yeah, kind of a wild thing. So back when we had our daughter in April. And at that time, the future of the company was, we were figuring out what are we going to do here. At that time, it was just prior to Bolt kind of getting kicked into, the rebirth of it with the new models and stuff. And so I knew that it was going to be, having a child is, if you talk to anyone that's done that, you don't have a lot of sleep. It's there's a lot of, to be a great parent is a ton of work. And then also being a startup CEO where there's a lot of uncertainty or whatever. The way I've always found, like when I have to go and kind of knock it out of the park in all aspects of my life is go and just to make it all aspects of my life. And so I just woke up one day, I was like, all right, I'm going to do an Ironman this year. And burned the ships, it cost $1,000 to do these, didn't know that. And just started, I never ran a marathon at that point. And so I think it was like 45 or 60 days after that, I ran a marathon. My brother-in-law, that was even more insane. 2 weeks before the marathon, I was like, hey, do you want to run a marathon in 2 weeks? He's like, sure. And just did it with me. He's not an endurance athlete either, right? But anyway, so I was training. Ended up getting a coach who's just like you kind of online. He's up in Marin. Great guy. Was on the U.S. Olympic team for triathlons. And when I told him, okay, I'm doing Ironman California in 3 months, he was like, are you insane? Like, what are you, you didn't ask for my opinion, but like, I just want you to know, I don't think this is a good idea. I think, like you shouldn't do this, etc. And I ended up doing it. I ended up getting it done. And so he was like, okay, like that's pretty.
But what makes you ignore expert advice here? Like most sane people would be like, okay, I mean, you know what you're doing. Like, oh, maybe wait a year.
I think, and this is kind of being a founder, right? It's all about like, if you, like I mentioned earlier, it's like when we talk to people that worked on browser engines, they're like, you can't build what you're talking about. I think the job of a founder is to solicit that advice. And what my coach actually said, he was right about certain things. Like, there are certain areas where I was under indexed on, like I was not, spending nearly enough time on my bike, for example. Like after that, I was on my bike 6 hours a day on the weekends. That's a lot of time to spend in the saddle, just kind of, and that was like, for a couple months leading up to it. He was right on certain aspects of it. But I kind of had to look internally and go, okay, like what is he kind of missing about who I am and like what I kind of know I'm capable of at this point? I mean, it was a nail biter. I mean, going into the thing, you get, and this is the same thing with launching Bolt. It's like, or launching anything, launch day, race day, you kind of go in, you're like, all right, here we go. Like we're gonna find out. We're gonna find out, how based in reality I was about all the decisions that led to this moment. And so, anyways, going and doing the Ironman in like 6 months, most people spend, the folks he trains, usually it's 1 to 2 years on this stuff before you try and do a full. It's like going and kind of doing in that sort of time frame. It's very similar. The same sort of skill set of going and building products. You have to really kind of look at the base reality and go make your own assessment on it, right? So.
Cool. Great story to wrap. Thank you so much, Eric.
Thanks for your time.
Heck yeah.